the one thing that the state has to do is to protect its citizens. I think both the US and Europe have given extraordinarily bad examples of how to deal with the crisis. And so I think they're ready for radical reforms right now because they're really scared. There's a potential crisis of legitimacy. Because, once you start dying, it becomes serious, right? You don't joke around.
So in this sense, we're always online. We're always looking for information. What are our reliable sources now in these very highly political times of fake news on all sides?
Yeah. Well, I'm gonna give an argument for my work. I think we need a lot of good curators. I'm dreaming if I had venture capital or any other form of capital, I would create some kind of curation system. You take 100 people and whose judgment you trust, and you let them filter the things that are valuable. Because I think as an individual, you're just overwhelmed with so many contradictory messages that it's just impossible to judge everything.
Mm-hmm.
So if we have a good combination of AI, pre-filtering maybe, and then some, but you actually need the human input. It's a new layer. Of course, it's a layer of mediation, but I think that was an illusion to think we couldn't do it without, to think we could do it without mediation was a big illusion. So the question is, what kind of mediation? What is good mediation? My work has become very difficult because of the cultural wars. There's always people saying, "Oh, you can't talk about this, you can't publish that, you can't choose that." People have become extremely sensitive, and it's not just filter bubbles. We're beyond filter bubbles. We now have communities that actively fight against disturbing things. Like they just don't want to hear it. They don't want to hear anything that challenges their preconceived views. So to maintain pluralistic curation platforms, I think that's really important. So you have, the Greek academies, right, with their legitimacy, they completely break down after the fall of the Roman Empire. So then you have the monasteries, which become the legitimate learning institution. They completely break down with the Reformation. So then you get the Republic of Letters, which is very similar to today, right? It's people outside the systems that are sharing and building common knowledge. And then you get an institutionalization by the state in the 18th century and creating the universities and doctorates. So I have no doubt that now we're in transition period and that we are going to invent some kind of other way, for legitimacy, right? I don't think a total lack of legitimacy is viable. Like if nobody believes anybody in a society, we don't have a society.
What is important, and it's in fact a very traditional way of dealing in an academic world, where that every idea, every opinion, every conviction is valuable, and you need to have the right to disagree with each other. I think this is something where, if I understand Michel well, is that the possibility to disagree. And the way we are doing that is at this moment not in a very constructive way happening around the world. Because, and that is due to identity politics that become like very, that are defining, in fact, the discourses. And so that's really the problem. So if it is, in academies and museums and cultural centers, so-called wrong ideas and not normal and cannot be expressed in several ways, then we don't have interesting breeding grounds anymore.
I was in a I won't name the names, but I was in a artistic jury, very important one, and they only gave money if you were intersectional. right? There's no subsidies went to anyone who didn't specifically agree on intersectionality. So a young woman in Germany, super interesting project. She didn't mention intersectionality out. I was really shocked. I had no idea that it had become so ideological that, it's not just that like the right wing disappeared from academia in the 90s. There's like, so when I was young, it was 50-50. And I think it was really pluralistic when I went to school. I had Marxist teachers, I had conservative teachers, a whole mix. In the 90s, the conservatives started dying out and they were replaced by leftists. And then in the 2010s, all the leftists that leave are replaced by intersectional people. And it's really narrowing the sphere of debate. I'm against this. I think this is really bad.
Yeah, there the third way that Latour is pointing to is quite interesting. I don't know if you know his theory about that, where that we go into this direction at this moment, and he's trying to find a common ground in the middle, which could give another force.
I actually read his book. Yeah,
huh?
I think he calls it terrestrial, right? Yeah. Instead of local, we have to become terrestrial. Yeah. And I like so one thing I remember is section 18, which I think is really interesting. So he talks about, as long as we talk about modes of production, which I still do as because I've been influenced by Marxism, you still think of the world as, we are subjects and the others are objects. And so he moves his language. I think this is really nice. Système d'engendrement. So you realize that humans and earthworms and bees are all co-creating. The system, which is alive, which is not a thing. It's a living system. Yes, I think this is very fruitful. I don't always like his work, but I think this. This sort of thinking is interesting.
By doing that, by creating this common ground, literally, everybody has something very concrete to discuss about and to move forward with.
So there's some things that I find interesting. You might, you get a bit of critique from the Green people, but I think it's interesting. It's called the sovereign nature movement. I don't know if you heard about it. So the idea is, you have a forest, and that forest is the commons, and you place it into non-dominion, which means the forest is owned by no one, or it owns itself, if you like, right? So this is the legal entity of the forest, which has a legal existence. Just as we recognize corporations, we recognize natural ecosystems. Then you put you put it as a DAO, so a distributed autonomous organization. So you give it sensors, you give it a computer system, and so, for example, if the forest sees that some of its parts are overfished or overused, it can trigger a legal action, right? And it can get income. And it can redistribute that income to all the contributors to the ecosystem. I think, personally, I like this. I think this is a fruitful way of thinking, marrying high tech and high touch. So it's like you advance ecology, but you also use, technology that can defend it, and it can defend itself, right? And so can you imagine this? You would have, we still have the market system, we get a wage if we work, but we will all be members of the global commons. One that I remember is from an author from Jacobin magazine, where he says, we have abundance and scarcity and hierarchy and equality, right? So scarcity with equality, he calls it communism, and he says it's Cuba. Okay, fair enough. Abundance with hierarchy is cognitive feudalism, right? It's all these, you have to pay a license for everything, you don't own anything. And so you have abundance, but actually you're still dependent on the hierarchy to get to the abundance. Then he says you have abundance and equality, and that's really the commons peer-to-peer vision. And then equality, no, scarcity and hierarchy, he calls it exterminism. So where you have, all these rich people going to the islands to save themselves, and everybody else dies. And it's realistic because I don't know if you read that from Douglas Rushkoff. So he went to this meeting with hedge funders, and he thought he would just give a lecture, but they had very precise questions. He says, "Okay, we bought all these islands, but how do we keep control of our workers after the apocalypse?" That was their worry.
Heavy.
Because they're one rich guy with 20 people who serve him, and if everything else collapses around you, how do you maintain that kind of order? So I don't think there's too many people who actively want that, but I think there's people who don't care about it, or who think that this is unavoidable, and then therefore in practice, they are actually exterminists, right? They say this world is going under, and we better make sure that we are not going under with it.
Yeah.
So that was a fruitful scenario for me. I thought that was a good one. I think one of the things you might look into is this kind of progressive blockchain sphere. You have Commons Engine, Commons Stack, Economic Space Agency. These are very interesting people. They're very thoughtful.
Yeah.
And in many ways, for example, you look at Economic Space Agency, they read Hayek and Marx, right? So they're able to think much more freely than old-style Marxists, right? They're not so ideological anymore. They just take whatever works for them. I think that this is interesting.
I have two more questions on my side, and I think you might have some more. The first one is, has the transition already happened?
Well, I think we're in the transition period. So I recommend Peter Pogani. His two books. One is called Rethinking the World. He's the first one who looks at thermodynamics, socioeconomic regimes, and mutations of consciousness, which is a very rare combination. And he says society is a complex adaptive system, so it only changes through chaotic transitions and bifurcations. So you have a stable system interrupted by chaotic transition, and you have a new stable system. And in this scenario, we are now right in the middle of a chaotic transition. The faith in the old system is crumbling, the institutions are crumbling, but the new isn't there yet. It's there in seed form, but it's not there in any accomplished way, right? So as Gramsci says, it's a time of monsters. So I think we're in the middle of it. And that's how COVID feels to me. It's like, I have a sense of irreality. Like, is this really happening? It's so c'est dérangeant. It's our whole life is appended, and we can't make plans for the future, and anything seems possible. I think this is typical for a chaotic transition. And it will be normalized for a while, but it's a bit like the Roman Empire. You got one shock and then another and then another. And each time it was weaker than before in order to overcome the next crisis. And if you look at how financially depleted the governments are making themselves, right? The interest rate is below zero. The debt will be like 300% of GDP for the United States. What it says is that the next crisis, what are they going to do?
My last question, at least on my side, is how can we avoid to reproduce the circumstances that brought us here? What should we not be doing?
Well, I think it's unavoidable. But I think what we can do is smoothen the transition, right? And so for me, that's the question is, How do we do that? If I was younger and I wouldn't have a family, I would say, okay, where's your food coming from? Make sure you have shelter. So I think people should be thinking not just in material, financial terms, but actually, if things get bad, how do we have access? Maybe go and live in an eco-village. But yeah, and of course that's what I'm trying to do politically, right? So if, for example, by proposing these public commons protocols, my idea is this is to smooth the transition, right? It's by itself, it's not enough, but if it can make things more easy and less people will die and people will get less angry, less scapegoating and less. So it's the more we can do to smoothen the transition, the less painful it will be. And I think the state can play a huge role in that. The public sector is absolutely vital. So I don't believe in 100% horizontalism or anything like that. I think it's always about how to find the best combinations. And there is a good article by Henry Mintzberg in the Stanford Social Innovation Review where he looks at that too. As he made some good points there. It's like, okay. He says the most successful projects are the ones that bring together, the three sectors of society. He calls it orchestrated planning, that's the state. Engaged grounding, I think that's he call it the plural sector, which is society. And then he talks about autonomous venturing, which is the business side, right? And the things that really works, he says, in our society are those that can combine successfully the three. Create an ecosystem where each has can play its good role. That's what you're doing. I think that's what you're doing.
Do you think so? Know. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's what you're trying to do. Yeah.
To try to maybe it's good that you try
to engage with the private sector, engage with civic.
So trying to bring these different forces together in an ecosystem in order to Yeah,
it takes longer. It takes longer to prepare, but once you have it, you have something very solid that has a lot of buy-in. And
I think that's a really good ending.
Yes, I think also that's a good conclusion.
Michel Bauwens, thank you so much for spending this time with us. I hope it's just the first part in a long series of conversations. You always inspire us, and a lot of our work has really been helped out by our ongoing conversation that we both really appreciate.
I sincerely hope that the confinement will end, and I hope to visit you guys in Arles, where I came twice and had a wonderful time. And I think you created an egregore, so yeah, thank you so much as well.